hit the spidey sense, I was like, oh, something's off.
I'm just like, man, I'm waiting to hear something, Wherever we go, they're always going to be around us. These things that go bump in the night. What's going on, guys, and welcome to another edition of the Warcry Podcast. I am your host, Yahola Tiger, and on this episode, we're going to be talking about Bigfoot. But before we do, I have been going live on TikTok, and I have been posting the entire live streams to YouTube. But here's the kicker. It's on the members only section of my channel. Now, it's only $1.99 a month. I thought about starting a TikTok subscription. I think I saw it was like $10 a month. And in this economy, $10 get you 2 gallons of milk. And I just, I don't want to charge people that much. So what I have done is basically taking these lives, and there's also going to be episodes, like not episode like 110, like 110, 110, 112, whatever. It's going to be separate from members only. Now, I only have a few people in there right now, but the more that we build that up, I'll start going live and, all that good stuff. But I'm trying to build it up. So go over there. Link is in this description of this episode. Go sign up. Right now, as of this past week, I got about 5 hours. I tell a lot of stories. I'm joined by Miss Ray, who talks about Louisiana paranormal, all different types of things, such as like conspiracies. We talked about all types of stuff on one of those live streams. I tell a bunch of stories. And then I'm joined by a gentleman. He goes by the name Big Indian. He's from Pawnee. What's crazy, I forget things. Like maybe it's just I take in so much information that I leave and I forget about things. This guy was in a storytelling contest that we did in Pawnee. He won it. And he tells one of the best Bigfoot stories that I have ever heard. And in that live stream, it's almost about 3 hours long. He's about 2 hours in that, like 2 hours of talking, and we tell stories from casino stories, LP stories. I talk about Dogman a little bit. I mean, we talk about all types of stuff in this live, and it's over on the members only on YouTube. Like I said, the link is in the description below. But it's only fitting that on this episode, we're talking about Bigfoot. I'm going to share I'm going to share with you. Golly, I'll be sharing y'all out. Here you go. You can have some of this person. That's crazy. That's insane. I cannot talk about those Epstein files anymore. I have people asking. I will do a members only Epstein file episode. It's coming next week. Okay. I cannot talk any more about Epstein on TikTok. I got my first violation. One more violation and I'm cooked. And then I'll never be on TikTok again. So I wanted to tell you guys that. YouTube membership. It's over there. It's in the description. $1.99 a month. Or if you want to get the $3.99, you can too. But I'm going to share with you a clip from this live. And it is a Bigfoot story. And it's the Bigfoot story that won him the storytelling contest back in Pawnee.
Bigfoot and just in general about him being like an animal. I never thought that. I'm like, man, he knows things. He knows certain ways. My theory is I think they do medicine too. That's how they disappear.
Yep.
It's a fascinating thing, man. I see a lot of these cryptid hunters and people, and I'm like, y'all going out there with too much cameras, y'all hollering too much. And
I
like,
know they do too much.
yes, yes. I was talking to a gentleman out of Indiana. He goes out there by himself, and I don't know if I should be telling this, but I'm gonna tell this. But he was telling me that he had been getting pictures of these things, like them peeking around the corner, like they're peeking around a tree. He was getting pictures of them, and he was posting them here on TikTok. Well, one day he kind of went a different way. He didn't go out into the way that he normally did, but he was up on the kind of the area where he could look down at his truck, or could see his truck, and he saw an unmarked vehicle pulled up, and they were looking at him, looking in his car, and he's like, I think that they were out here, and he said that basically once he left and got out of there, he came back and he said he didn't hear like, cause he'd be out there by himself, in the middle of these woods in Indiana, and he said they were gone. He said Bigfoot was gone. He said I hadn't heard him. I said, dang, I wonder what they did to him.
Too busy looking for him.
Yeah.
The ones that look for him, they don't find him.
Mm-hmm. I would say this, like, I love that, like, we're all different in our own ways. A lot of tribes. But man, we be, we know when we know something, like, everybody knows it. We all believe that.
Yep.
Like,
Everybody has their own experiences.
Yes. Growing up, it's like my grandpa said, if you're ever looking for something, you're never going to find it. It's going to find you.
Yeah, that's how it usually goes. You go looking for it, you're not going to find it. But if you're bad enough, you will find it, but it's not going to be in that good way.
Yep. You gotta. I guess for those who haven't heard your story, could you? I mean, you don't have to if I'm putting you on the spot, but could you tell that story that we were talking about earlier?
Yeah, I can tell it. So this happened up north, and my cousin, he asked me if I wanted to go singing. I used to powwow back in the day, and the way we used to get our voices strong is we'd go to Sundance and sing all night long, and that builds your voice up. And so I told him, yeah, let's go, come pick me up. And so he picked me up, and we went up north. We went to up the hills where they had the Sundance. And we got over there and we start singing. Everybody run around the drum. There was probably about 18 of us around it. And we're all sitting there singing, and you can hear the whistles going off inside the arena. And we're just sitting there, and there was probably about 50, 60 people sitting outside there. They're watching everything going on. And we're just having a good time singing around the drum. And I look across the drum and I see some singers. They got this scared look on their face. And I was like, what's going on? And all of a sudden I smelled something really rancid. It was really bad. I was like, oh my God. And I look over my shoulder, and standing in the entrance in the arena was Bigfoot. He was just standing there. He was just sitting there. And everybody that was around the arena kind of cleared out of his way. They gave him a wide berth so he could stand there. And nobody said anything. They just kind of got out of his way, and they just stood there and watched him. And he come up, and I guess the sounds of the whistles is what called him. But he came over, and he was sitting there standing in the doorway watching what's going on. And he stood about 8 foot tall, and he just stood there watching. And we're sitting there freaking out. And one of the elders walked up on us. He said, keep singing. Just keep doing what you're doing. Keep singing. And we're standing there. We're just like, okay, so we did what we're told, but we were all freaking out. We're just sitting there, and we kept looking over our shoulders, looking at him. And he just stood there probably like 5-10 minutes, just sitting there watching what was going on. And as quick as he showed up, is as quick as he left. And there's no electricity up there. There's no lights. The only lights are from the headlights of cars. And he showed up, and all of a sudden he walked off into the pitch black, and he was gone. And we were sitting there. We finally got done with the song, and the elders come up, and they were sitting there telling us that we did a good job. You guys did good. Just keep doing what you're doing. Don't stop. We're kind of freaking out. So we carried on another song, and we're standing there singing. And all of us were freaked out about what we just witnessed. And we're just sitting in there, and we get done with the song, and we gave the dancers a minute of break. We're sitting there. And the elders walked up to everybody, and they're explaining, what was going on. And they told us, don't say anything to nobody. Don't tell anybody what you saw here. He says, what you saw was, just for us. Don't be telling everybody. Now, word on the res got around pretty quick what had happened, but what they meant by that is don't tell outsiders.
Mm.
Years ago, they had outsiders, they told the world what had happened. And they had people from all over the country coming to the reservation, and they were everywhere. There were places they shouldn't be. They were trespassing, and they didn't want another spectacle like that again. And so they told everybody not to say anything to outsiders, just keep it to ourselves. And so that's what we did, but 50 or 60 people witnessed this.
Mm.
They saw what had happened. They saw who it was that walked up on them. And everybody was quiet about it, but they told everybody on the res what they saw. And we just kept going on, singing all through the night. And nobody wanted to leave because we were scared that we might run into him down the road. But we kept going, but we wanted to leave, but that was neither here nor there. And finally, sunlight came up. Daybreak happened, and so all the dancers went to lay down to rest, and we were done singing. And so we left. All of us singers, we took off. We left. We took off, and none of us said anything leaving. We just kind of quietly packed up and left. Me and my cousin didn't say anything going down the road in the entire trip, but we kept our eyes out in case we might run into him. We never did, but it was kind of a weird moment. We just kind of freaked out about what we saw. My cousin dropped me off home, and I told my parents what had happened, and we smudged off. And it was kind of a freaky incident. And we went back up there the next night. Nothing else happened, but it was kind of weird for him just to walk up. But I guess all the whistles from the singer or the dancers called him,
Mm.
and he just came to investigate what the sound was. He just come in and he was spectating, like everybody else, and he turned around and left. He just saw what was happening and he left. But everybody was freaking out about it. But that's a story about what happened when Bigfoot came to the Sundance.
That's a great story. Let me ask you a question. Do you think when they hear our drums, they hear the whistles, they hear things like that, do you think that there's something in them that knows that?
Yeah, back in the day, they used to say that they used to intermingle with one another. They used to live with one another, and so they know the ways. They know all of these ancient traditions that they have, and we used to swap traditions back in the day. Like there were beings that lived amongst us, and so we used to swap medicines and songs and stories and stuff. And somewhere through there, they had a split, and so they went off on their own, and so they understand and know the traditions of what happens. So I think that's what it was just the whistles calling him, and he just wanted to come spectate to see what was going on. But he had no malicious intent. He had nothing mean or anything behind it. He just was curious to see what was going on. But yeah, I do believe that he just come to check it out just to see what was going on, and he understood what was happening and he left.
It's awesome. That's one of my favorite Bigfoot stories I've ever heard. I have referenced that your story a few times just in different places that you guys saw him show up. I didn't go into details. People ask what's one of the best Bigfoot stories you've heard. I said I've heard a bunch, but yours and another one, and I told it on a live stream on Tuesday. But basically, somebody shot at one, and they tore up everything. You disrespected them. You attacked them, and I think the person said they ripped heads off chickens, and the horses were dead, and just crazy stuff. I don't know if you have heard any bad stories of them. I haven't heard very many, but that's the one I have heard.
Yeah, one of the one of the stories that I haven't told, but just recently I've started telling because people were curious about the evil that he can do is that I was attacked by him.
Man, one of the best Bigfoot stories that I had ever heard. But he goes on to tell about a time that he was attacked by Bigfoot. So if you want to go hear that story, go over to YouTube memberships. Get your membership, $1.99 a month. More to come. He's going to come on the podcast eventually. We'll see how that shakes out. I have a few other people who are wanting to come on the podcast that are wanting to talk about portals. So it'll be interesting. This is Creepy's coming soon. That sounded crazy. It's on its way. I'm collecting stories. So if you have a story you want to tell or want to share, realwarcrypod@gmail.com, or message me on TikTok. Or if you want to, wherever you're hearing this, leave your email in the comments and I will take your email and I will send you a message and being like, hey, hello, what's going on? How can I help you today? No, I'm just kidding. But no, I will. I'll email you and be like, hey, it seems like you got a story to tell or something. And I appreciate everybody who has reached out and has given me their thoughts and opinions on previous episodes. That means a lot to me. I appreciate it. It lets me know that like you guys are enjoying it. I think a lot of times I don't really like, hey, let me know what you think. And I don't hear anything. So I'm like, I don't know what people want to hear. So let me know in the comments what you think about the episode. And if you enjoyed it. Dang, if you're gonna talk shit, then I'll have to say something. No, I'm just kidding. But I'm always trying to gauge on what you guys want to hear and what you guys want to talk about. We got a lot of stuff going on in this world nowadays, and so it's rough out here. And there's a lot of times I catch myself wanting to do an episode of just like, here's everything bad in the world, but can't operate that way. We gotta continue to keep pushing forward and moving on. Our mental health, we got to take care of that. I know everybody says, oh, you need to go work out. Your body's got to be strong. But if your mind ain't there, nothing's there. So we got to get it right. With all that being said, let's get to the episode, y'all. The episode today is obviously Bigfoot. Now, Bigfoot is I don't know if it's a controversial topic. I don't really know how I want to phrase it in that way. But it is something that can be a little bit divisive. So everything that I'm going to say is things that I've heard or my personal beliefs about Bigfoot. And also stories that I've heard about their behavior. When I was a little guy, the first time I ever heard about Bigfoot, I might have been 6 or 7. And my dad's friend was telling a story. We when we're a bunch of natives are together, Indians together, we tell stories, we talk, we go, 6, 7, 8 hours of just talking, and we never run out of something to talk about either. That's just how it is. So we're all hanging out, and he starts telling this story. He's on his way. I believe he was on his way home. I can't exactly remember where he was at on this. Either he was heading towards his house or going away from his house. But anyways, back in the, day, 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, there used to be a golf course behind the casino that is now. So the casino that you guys see when you come into Tahlequah, there used to be a back road back there. It may still be back there. But there used to be like a mini golf course or something back there. And I could be wrong. It may not have been a golf course. But it basically was a road that separated, and it was just pasture. And then you get up into the hills on the right-hand side as you're heading into Tahlequah. It's a back road. I mean, paved. But he was driving, and he thought he saw something on the side of the road, and he kind of looked. He said, I don't know what that is. He kept driving. Well, he was kind of slowing up when he got to it, and when he kind of put his brakes on, he looked in the rear view mirror, and all he could see was an arm. It was big. And he kind of stopped for a minute, and it just kind of walked off into the darkness. I had told this story on this podcast before. And my dad, I said, hey, go ahead and tell your friend. I remember that story he told back years ago. He's like, okay, yeah. And then his friend, he's like, I don't remember that. And so he kind of sat with it for a while. And then he came, he talked about it. I said, hey, I remember that. I just didn't, it's so long ago. He said, but I remember seeing something with, it was big. You can see its arm. And there are multiple different ways that I could go with this story. But that's how it started for me. As someone who looks into the things and asks the questions of things that go bump in the night and things that we cannot see sometimes or hear. And then as I got older, I started hearing more stories. My dad was telling a story about him and his cousin. I don't want to say a cousin's name, even though he's told me a lot of Bigfoot stories. Or he's told me some Bigfoot stories. But they were up at Yahola Canadian, around that tribal town headquarters. And they ended up seeing something in the road. And it said that the sunshine just hit it just right. And they took off, but it scared them. We hear those stories. I heard another story from my dad. I'll have my dad tell those two stories. That story I just mentioned, he has the full thing. I just want to give you guys a brief. But I heard these stories growing up. And it got me curious, so I started getting into podcasting and YouTube at its infancy. If you guys remember Blogspot I think is what it was called. And I stumbled across, and shout out to Matt Knapp from Bigfoot Crossroads, but I stumbled upon his original podcast with Baron Kumbo and then himself. And they were called the Bigfoot Outlaws. And so I grew up on that. I heard the stories about, when there was a guy who owned a bunch of horses, and the horses' hair would be braided. It looked like it had been braided. And they think it, some people think it's LP. They thought it was Bigfoot. I heard the stories about how you call for these things. And Matt, if you want to go back and listen to Matt from Bigfoot Crossroads talk about the first time he had ever been out there with those two gentlemen, he said that they got, he said that one of those two gentlemen had the best Bigfoot call. And so I listened to those guys, and I move on through, and I start hearing stories, and then I start collecting stories as I get into my high school, college years. And I have a knack for people they just tell me stories. I don't know how it shakes out. And then you get your elders, like in Cherokee camp, they talked about Bigfoot. We talk about our supernatural beings and, how we respect them. So what I think about Bigfoot, I think it is a flesh and blood thing, but I don't think it's an animal. And if you heard the clip earlier, I believe that they are like a secret tribe. And I've mentioned this before. And I'm going to get into a little deeper on that. And if you heard the clip earlier, obviously you have if you're here at this point in this podcast. We as natives have been interacting with these beings for a very long time. We have been trading traditions with them. We have always known that they were around. And something happened. Maybe it was the Europeans coming over, and Bigfoot said, I can't deal with these metal weapons that they're bringing. They bring harm upon us. Maybe that's what it was. But it is something to think about when you look at the annals of history and spoken stories. Is that it's sometimes disregarded in modern day crypto research. And one thing that was mentioned in the clip is that we natives all have similar stories of these beings. They're just a little different depending on where we're at and depending on our experience with them. Most of them have been good for the most part, but you do hear every now and then the evil parts of this being. And there are other beings out there who we mistake as Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Istachupko. We mistake them. And you've heard me on this podcast talk about the one who makes you forget. It has red eyes. But it looks like, and it's often seen as hairy. So we equate it to being Bigfoot, but it's different. Maybe that's what we see with the evil. But what's fascinating about just the subject of Bigfoot is how much we try to put science on what is not known about, quote unquote, magic. Because if you look back 1600s, 1700s, 1500s, 1400s, things that seemed unbelievable were deemed as magic, but it was just science, basic science. I've heard people tell me in a lot of comments when I talk about Bigfoot that they're interdimensional beings and they're from a different planet or plane of existence. I guess both, really. The greatest alien abduction story, that episode with Hunters of the Paranormal, he said his grandfather was taken to a place where he saw Bigfoot and they were coming from underground, which is something that a lot of tribes believe that they do, or that's where they live.
And these beings, to me, are very intelligent. I believe that they can understand things. Something that I've heard from different elders, different people, that if you speak, like someone would speak Cherokee to them and they would understand. And I remember what asking the question was like, well, do you think that they're like us? We're not saying that these Bigfoot are Cherokee, but like when they're in our territory, when we were sharing a territory, Tennessee, Georgia, all those, places, North Carolina, all these different places that possibly they learned Cherokee and they passed it down as a way to communicate with us. That's a question that I often ask. And if you have that answer, let me know in the comments. But I've heard people say that they spoke Cherokee to them and they understood them. And they, asked, or someone said, hey, please leave us alone. We're just here hanging out, whatever. And they go away. They go about their business. I've also heard different researchers talk about, them feeding, and that there's some just blind ape that once you feed an animal, obviously the animal's going to begin to expect that food. And I don't know if I believe that or not. I think that there is a level of beast in these beings, much like us. When you get a steady food source, you want to keep that source going. But also another thing that I think about when people say that they feed these Bigfoots, Sasquatch, is we are finding out that our food is really bad for us. So once these animals ingest this, does it make them go crazy? Because their bodies cannot retain that. Does it give them the addiction of never having actual sugar in like granular form? Does that make them, how a crackhead needs crack? Is that how it is with sugar with them? They got to get that high of that sugar. Because if everybody knows with sugar, if you eat a bunch of it and you're not taking in protein, all these other things, you're going to crash and you're going to be irritable. Is that what's happening to them? And that's why we see or hear stories about people getting fits of rage about them to them from these beings. Another thing that is fascinating to me, and it is very prevalent because we're seeing them at my parents' house, is the markings. Now, there have been multiple documentaries. I think even Survivor Man Bigfoot saw some. When Survivor Man went out and did his Bigfoot expedition, because he had been hearing things out in the woods, he was seeing things that kind of looked like shelter. And he was seeing these specific X's, hung up in a tree, or, purposely, you could see where the tree was ripped, snapped, and it had a basically like a fence, letting maybe another clan know that, hey, don't come here, this is ours. But we as humans don't see that. And we don't really look anymore. A lot of people aren't really in the woods anymore either. Because we are kind of like domesticated cats. Humans. Especially here in America. We like our AC. We like our soft pillows. We like our nice beds. And so being out in the woods is not something that is favorable for us. But people that do go out there, they usually see things that are unexplainable to them. And the X's in the kind of sheltered looking, things are interesting. Because are they building them to keep us out, or are they letting us know in their way that don't come past this point? There's just a lot to this topic. And I often think about what exactly they, are in terms of the being that they are. Because interdimensional is interesting. The flesh and blood, I definitely think that that's there. But an aspect that I've only heard a few times, just kind of in passing on the internet, reading, blog forums, that there's an entity called Dogman. And that the Dogman is subservient to Bigfoot. That's like its attack hounds. I don't know very much about it. I just have heard, if you guys have heard Martin Grove's story, that's a fascinating story. And then I've also heard different things about, kind of adjacently for that. Because since they are intelligent beings, do they have more to it? Now that gets into conspiracy. I don't know. It's a fascinating rabbit hole to go down. Another thing I think is very fascinating is I have received stories from people who talk about UFOs or UAPs regarding these Bigfoot. That when they've seen Bigfoot, that they've also seen an aircraft. I would say aircraft. They've seen something in the sky that doesn't look like something that should be there. Right after that, they've seen these Bigfoot. A story that comes to mind is out of Pawnee. Pawnee is a very creepy place. I have received a lot of stories from Pawnee. And all of them, I believe. And this one is a very interesting one. Two gentlemen, they got permission to hunt this land out in Pawnee, deer lease. And a lot of weird things always happened out there. Like they would be out there getting ready to start their hunt, and mechanical failures would begin. Phones would be bled dry of energy, of battery power. They had cars break down. They had trucks stuck out of nowhere, randomly. They had one time when they were bringing the trailer out, they were trying to move the trailer to a specific spot, and that trailer ended up getting stuck, and so they just left it. They couldn't move it. Oftentimes they would finally get out of there, get unstuck. But these weird things were happening on this deer lease quite some time. So they didn't really think nothing about it. And so they said, well, let's go out here and let's see if we can get something. The trailer's out there. We can stay there. Everything will be all right. So they go out there and get everything set up. And it's, getting dark. And they said, let's lay down. We got to get up early in the morning. So they're kind of hanging out in the camper, trailer type thing, whatever it is. And they started hearing something outside. And it sounded like things, something was out there messing with stuff. It sounded like something was trying to get into their truck. Things was moving around. Trailer shook a little bit. They hear like something was trying to, steal something. So he's thinking it's like an intruder, somebody maybe walking by, passing along, whatever, and he had to, something's got to happen. But he also realized that they're pretty far out in this deer lease. It's pretty secluded out here. He said that the gentleman who's telling me the story, he says, I was the scaredest I've ever been in my entire life. And so they start looking around to try to find a weapon. And they end up coming with like pots and pans and just kind of stuff that, is it going to stop anything? Probably not. And so finally he's kind of breathing. Okay. And then he finally decides to open the door. And he opens that door and there's nothing out there. He's like, that's weird. So they run around with their little pots and pans, going to be conking somebody on the head. Whatever they got to do to defend themselves. And, they start looking around and all of a sudden they realize nobody's out here. But on the window of one of the truck, there was a greasy handprint. Monstrous greasy handprint. And it looked like that the hair was greasy as well because the way it hit, like it was looking inside the cabin of the truck, and the hair was, pinned up against it. And then when it pulled off, you could see like hair grease, whatever. So they load up. They get out of there. Scared. I mean, he said that he was flying down that road to get out of there. All of a sudden he looks up, all of a sudden they kind of turn back to look, and there's a light coming up. It said like it followed them. Came out of nowhere, this light in the sky. Followed them. And eventually they just kind of petered off. I don't know what that is. I asked him, do you think it's Bigfoot? And he goes, it might be. He said, but the light in the sky is what's weird. And I don't know what those are. It also brings me back to the Hunters of the Paranormal episode about his grandfather. What if they were trying to, I don't know, not abduct, but that's their staging area. Where they load and offload Bigfoot, I don't know. It sounds crazy. When I said that just now, I felt a tinge of weirdness. But it could be out there. That could be a thing. We don't know. But that story happened. And I believe him. Because him and his buddy both messaged me and told me. So I was like, all right, okay. And their details, like the same. And then I've had other people reach out and say, yeah, there's some weird areas out here in Pawnee, especially out in these woods. You just don't know what it is. I don't know what this guy is. Because you hear those stories, and then I hear a story like this. I used to date this girl back when I was in college. And she lived out in the middle of nowhere, basically, up on a hill. And how I'll describe this, people have told me the highway number, but I can't remember right now at this very moment. So in the comments, let me know. So if you're in Tahlequah and you're headed down to where the big slide is, like you're headed to the river, to all those floating places, you take a right to go towards the river. But if you keep going straight, you kind of go up a hill, cross the river, across the bridge, and then you go up the hill. So she lived out that way. And when she gave me the address first time I went out there, I was like, damn, we in the middle of nowhere over here. And so the first time I went out there, it's daylight. I was picking her up, and so we went up her driveway is creepy too. It's like castle, like weird zigzag driveway because there's so much rocks on this property. So I'm going up this zigzag driveway and pick her up, and we hang out, whatever, and I take her back. She wanted me to pull by the door. So I pulled up real close to the door, I waited for her, and so I said, all right, went on my way. And so maybe a week later or so, she said, hey, come over, we're going to watch this show. I said, I can't remember what show it was. Might have been Walking Dead or something. And I said, okay, but I'm gonna go hoop at Woodall. I'll come back around about 8:00, so 9:00-ish. And she says, well, if you do, you need to park close to the house. And I'm like, all right, and I'm thinking nothing of it. So I get done playing basketball at Woodall, and I start heading that way. And I don't, she said, text me when you get here, and I'll be at the door waiting for you. I said, I think that's kind of weird. That's weird to me. It's like you're like waiting by the door, making sure that I get into your house safely. It's like, dang, I can't even just walk to the door without getting accosted. No, but so I was like, all right, it's kind of thinking nothing of it, whatever. I think about it now, like that's kind of weird, but so I pull up in this long driveway, and I park at the, behind another car. I'm not thinking nothing of it. I just wasn't listening, I guess. And get out the car, lock it, and I start walking up there, kind of just moseyly, just walking. And I text her, say, hey, I'm here. And something, I just out of nowhere felt like something was behind me. Like something was coming up behind, like Spidey sense. So I kind of look over my shoulder and I don't see nothing. I'm walking up to the house, and I can see where she's walking from where she was at upstairs. I can see the lights turning on as I'm walking up to the door. But I can still feel that feeling of something is right behind me. So I look again, there's nothing there. And so I'm sitting there by the door waiting, to be let in. And I just get this weird feeling like something's watching me. Something or someone is watching me. And so I'm looking around, I don't see nothing. There's nothing behind me. I'm standing by the door. My back is facing the door. And I'm just looking. There's nothing there. And she opens that door. It's like, what are you doing? Why did you not text me before you came to this door? Why are you out here? And I'm like, I just didn't think nothing of it. She's like, get in here. And I was like, all right. So then we made our way, and I was like, what's going on? I was thinking, I was like, werewolves out here, because I'm into that stuff. Obviously y'all know I'm into that stuff. And she's like, no, it's just something, it's weird out here. Like ever since we moved out here, it's always been weird. I was like, okay. She's lived there a long time. Her dad, I don't give any business out. Anyways. So I'm thinking about this all night. So we go over to the next room, and we're watching whatever show we're watching. Then next to the room there was a pool table. Or upstairs this house was the weirdest built house I've ever seen. But basically they had like a little thing where you can it's like a spindle thing that goes from the downstairs to the upstairs, but it was like a spiral stairwell. It was the weirdest thing. It was kind of scary to go up because it's like there's not a lot of. It's like very small. And so we're upstairs, and I'm talking and to the boyfriend of her sister, and I said, "Hey, why are they weird about this?" He's like, "Man, there's something out here. Like there's something legitimately out here." He said, I did the same thing. He's like, felt like something grabbed me from behind as I was walking into the door. Like I was coming inside the door. And I'm like, what? He said, yeah, man, I wouldn't. He's like, if you come here again at this time when it's night, he said, I would pull by the door. Especially if you're leaving. Like if you're leaving, you need to just pull by the door. I said, all right. I said, that's okay. I said, what do you think it is? He says, man, I think it's something he said, I don't know. He said that every time I come out here and it's night, he said, I'm not outside long enough to even deal with it. So I'm like, all right, this is kind of weird. So we're hanging out and, I end up leaving. She's like, let me walk you to the car but let me get, like, it was the weirdest thing, man. It was so funny. Basically, we walked to the car. I drove back up to the house where I was at, dropped her off. She went inside, and then I pulled off. Nothing weird happened, just leaving. And so on down, weeks later, she's like, hey, she started telling me the story. And the way she was telling it, I was like, this doesn't sound like a burglar, like someone who's trying to rob you. So I asked her, I said, what did he, so she was in her room, is how she was telling me. And like when I saw her room on the downstairs, it's like a big pane window. It's like where her bed sat, the glass window went all the way up to the ceiling and kind of curved. So when she was laying in her bed, she could see up, especially if the moon was out real bright. She could see all the way up that hill. And there's like little saplings that kind of are littered, throughout. And then there's one big old tree that she could see right in her line of view as she's laying in her bed. And she said it was getting late, or it was getting dark, and she was, real tired from the day. And so she's looking, and she sees someone. She said it was a black guy. Now, guys, we know that that person fitting that description is not going to be out in the middle of the woods in Tahlequah. It's just not going to happen. But she said it looked like somebody who had dark skin, had a hoodie on, and had black gloves on. But the face was dark. So she was thinking that somebody had snuck up there and was waiting for them to all go to bed and was trying to rob them. And like she just describing it as a black guy in a hoodie. And I'm like, that ain't right. I told her, that doesn't sound right. I said, you guys are so scared about whatever's out here. It can't be that. And so she's kind of thinking about it. And she's like, yeah. She's like, but it was watching me from the window. Like I was laying in bed and I could see it, and I could see it seeing me. But I don't think it could see me seeing it. And I was like, oh. But it stood there for a while, she said, and just watched her. That just was sitting there. And behind this, kept peeking out behind the tree. And I said, did you see anything else? She says, every now and then I'll hear, like when I'm outside or I'll have the window open, or if we're on the balcony overlooking, or, kind of right next to that hill that's real rocky. She's like, yeah, we can hear something running on 2 feet. So she's like, it's weird out here. I said, you don't think it's Bigfoot? And she's like, no, I don't believe in those things. Like she was like adamantly like, I don't know. There's no way that there's Bigfoot. There's absolutely no way that this can happen. And I told her, I said, I think that's Bigfoot. And, I stopped, dating her after, so I didn't go over there again. But I often wonder what was out there. But see, I hear stories like that. And I'm like, these things are watching us when we're out in their domicile, or what they believe to be their domicile or their territory. It's fascinating. I don't know I don't know directly what they are. But what I believe that they are is I believe that they've been here for a very long time. And I don't know about the interdimensional. I don't know about the aircraft, them being offloaded and from another planet. But I do know that they've been here for a very long time. And I do know that they come from the underground. Old Seminole man, Tim Harjo, he's Muskogee. I think he was Muskogee Creek and Seminole, if you can correct me. He had a clip that I love, and he was with a Seminole elder, and they were talking about how Bigfoot comes from the ground and that he had magic. And that's one of my favorite clips. If you guys, you can go on my TikTok and watch it, or you can watch it here on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube. But they talk about it like that's how it can disappear. And that's the next thing I'm going to talk about here. I've seen a lot of Bigfoot researchers in their assertions and their opinions and their research talk about how Bigfoot is there and then it's not. And they just chalk it up to their hair and the light. Now, we do know that something that can blend in to maybe a tree with the same hair color and it stands next to it and it looks like it's something else. We know that. Like, that's a proven scientific method. And I understand that they came to that conclusion. I'm not saying that they're wrong, but I'm saying that I don't think it's that. Because for as long as I can even remember, I've heard stories about people disappearing. Like, they're there 1 minute, then they're gone. And I'm not talking about missing 411. I'm talking about they have the ability to just kind of step to the side and disappear out of your sight. A story that I always laugh about, and I've told it a few times, is how when Bacone College in Muskogee was going through really bad financial turmoil and they were starting to fire people, my grandpa said, if you really want to and you don't want to be seen and you don't want people to know where you are or where you're at, you can do that. He's like, yeah. And he's like, they were down bad, how bad Bacone was. And he just kind of didn't say nothing, just took a step back, did his work. And he showed up to all the meetings, signed in. And one day he said something. And they all looked at him and said, Tiger, what are you doing here? I thought we fired you. He said, no, I'm still here. And they all kind of looked at him like, huh. He always told a story about Chito Harjo. He was out running away from federal agents back in the day. And he had come across a Bigfoot. And this Bigfoot, he said that he, told him that he could disappear. And the Bigfoot showed him how to disappear. Or turn into a stump or a tree or whatever. Taught him how to do those things. And he was telling his snake gang that's how I do things. A lot of stories about that guy. Muskogee Creek College, side note, has a mini documentary about Chito Harjo. So you want to know more about the way that he knew medicine, go check that out. It's very good. But that's how he says that he learned how to do these things. It's from Bigfoot. Now, I want to say this, and nobody misconstrues it. Like, oh, I'm saying that they, this and this. I always get people asking, what do you mean they're in a clan? Like they're a clan or a tribe. I look at Bigfoot how I look at natives. Bigfoot, let's say before the Europeans showed up, before any contact with any outside world, and that these two Bigfoot and tribes had a relationship with each other. They knew each other. They practiced the same medicines. Well, as the years rolled on, for us natives or indigenous people, we started to lose some of our ways, especially when the Europeans arrived. We started losing those things. We saw things and we wanted to have them, and we were exposed to things that were not maybe the best for us. Now, I look at Bigfoot in the same way. Once people started making those treks through the woods and started making their habitat into cities, small towns, villages, however you want to say it, they started losing their ways too, but it took them longer. Like, they were still active in their ways. If they wanted you to see them, you would see them. So once America began to be colonized and everyone started moving west, Bigfoot started to, maybe numbers started to drop. This part's hypothetical, but or really just a thought that I have. So in our communities as Native people, there are still people who practice very strong things, medicine, or to non-natives it's called magic. But they still practice those things. Those people are still around. Still got very strong medicine. Is it as strong as it was before European contact? Maybe not. It's just different, maybe, too. I'm not an expert. And if you are someone who practices medicine and you listen to my podcast, don't come after me. This is just my thought. It's different now because we have all these influences from different cultures from all over the world that are now here in America that, influences us. For Bigfoot, it's the same way. There are I think that there are select people or select Bigfoots who can do the old ways still. It's not every Bigfoot, it's just some Bigfoot. And so when people run into these Bigfoots who can do these things, that's where trying to find out an answer to a question that is unknown is where we are with that when it comes to them disappearing and being camouflaged. I'll tell you guys a story from Mr. Derek Morris. Shout out Derek Morris. He was on his way to work. He sees a Bigfoot, very large Bigfoot, on the side of the road as he was driving. He said that he had to, it was the weirdest thing he had ever seen, but when that Bigfoot stepped over that fence, it was gone. And the way that he described, so you have the road, the fence, and then past the fence in that field, it was just pasture. The tree line was on way down. But he said once that Bigfoot stepped over that fence, it was gone. It was like it poofed. That's an example. Matt from East Tennessee Bigfoot was telling me a story about how his aunt was driving home or was driving to somewhere and saw this stump and saw this kind of weird looking stump. She kind of looked at it as she was driving by like, oh, that's weird. And on her way back, she looked over and the stump was gone. Weird looking stump was gone. Because she remembered it. This is the same spot. It was gone. And we were talking about that because non-natives cannot, how I say this without sounding pretentious. You guys, especially white people, European descent people, you guys were so against things that were unknown to you that you burned people at the stake for it. So you have had multiple generations of people who your healers, your natural healers, all those people were burned up and their information has been lost and was replaced with religious indoctrination. So you have hundreds of years of this, and then you came over to America and has continued the same thing. And so the idea of medicine / magic is something that cannot be explained, so it doesn't exist, or you cannot find an answer to it until your matrix is broken. And what I mean by matrix is your reality that you know it to be in this very moment. That's shattered, then you can start seeing those things. You can start understanding the things that were here before your people were here. And so when I've heard people say, oh, no, there's no way, that's not real. That's fake. I always have to say, for people who do not believe in the paranormal, if you cannot believe in the paranormal, I don't know how you can believe in Jesus. And then they go, oh, well, it's faith. Ah. Believing in things that you just hope to be true. Look at the definition of faith. So when I hear people say that, I always bring up Jesus. Well, or in Christianity, the Christian God. Okay. You don't know what you don't know until you know it. And so I've had people say these, oh, well, there's no way. But we have stories, especially as indigenous people, have stories of these beings helping us by using their magic or their medicine. If there's any other, I know I'm missing a few other, things that people talk about. And there will be a part 2 to this episode. It'll be a part 2, and it'll be down the road. It's not going to be next week, 2 weeks. It's going to be months from now. And there will be, and I forgot to mention this on the last episode with LP, there will be another LP part 2 episode. We'll get, different other things that I missed, because people in the comments were like, hey, you forgot about this. I'm like, oh, dang, I did. No, I'm not going to bat 100% on a lot of this stuff, but there will be a part 2 to both of these. But let me know in the comments what I missed and what other things you want me to talk about when it comes to Bigfoot, when it's regarding Bigfoot. I love the topic. I always tell people, yeah, I love talking about it, but sometimes it just gets too much. People get too crazy about it. I don't know how else to describe it, but they just get insane. They start getting personal over a thing that technically science cannot prove, but we know to be real. And it's fascinating to see it, but it's also, it's just like, I don't even care to be a part of that. And that's why you don't see me on any of these, a lot of cryptid shows, unless I've listened to their content and trust them. Like, I've been on Matt Knapp, Squatch and Holler, Cryptids of the Corn. I'm missing other people, but I've been on those because I enjoy their stuff, and they talk about things and they ask the questions. That's what it comes down to, is asking the question. And somebody out there will have a piece to the puzzle that you're trying to put together. And that's why I ask the questions that I ask. And if you're someone who may have a piece to my puzzle, come forward. I'd love to hear your story. And that's a lot of it too for me, is that I'll have someone reach out and they'll tell me a story that has a small detail that I'm like, oh, okay. And then it's weird how it all works sometimes. Is someone will tell a story and tell me a story, and then another person, like a month later, will tell me another story, and I'm like, oh, okay, those two, I can, two different people in two different locations have heard this, or have seen this, or experienced this, and I'm like, okay, I can put that together. Like, okay, we have something on that thread that we can keep pulling. So, like I said earlier, if you want to send me a story, TikTok Warcry Pod. I am on, what is it called? Upscrolled and Blue Sky Warcry Pod. I'm preparing for my eventual banning on TikTok, even though I don't even be saying nothing. But then you can find me on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Obviously, you're listening to this on some one of those platforms. But if you want to send me a story, real, REAL, warcrypod@gmail.com. That will be all in the description below. And sign up for that membership on YouTube. $1.99 a month. As of right now, there are 3 live streams, about 5 hours of content up there for this week. And I also have the Tulsa Skinwalker episode, where I talk about a gentleman who I used to work with who knew things, and he was using them not in the best way. So go check those out. And I appreciate everyone for continuing supporting the podcast. It really does mean a lot to me. And I just cannot say it enough. But as always, y'all, I'll catch you on the next one.